Hi everybody! Hello, Mr. Dr. Rutger Vos.
Hi Gil, how are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm really excited. I have butterflies in my stomach because we are launching our first podcast series that we're gonna do together. Rutger, we are calling it In Movies.
Yeah, it's exciting. I'm looking forward to this.
This is Sparta!
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Das war ein Befehl! Der Angriff Steyrs war ein Befehl!
What we do in life echoes in eternity.
All right, but apart from the sanitation, the medicine, education, wine, public order, irrigation, roads, a fresh water system and public health, what have the Romans ever done for us?
So tell the audience, what are we going to do in this podcast?
Well, the first In Movies is going to be about classical Greece in the movies. The format for the show is that each time we pick 3 movies that are along a shared theme.
Yes.
And then in addition to that, we pick each a surprise bonus movie, which we don't announce just yet. So it's actually a surprise for the both of us still. So we're going to be shocked in a second.
So we picked 3 movies to talk through them about ancient Greece. And we're going to go chronologically. We picked Troy, 300, and Alexander.
Yes. And so the chronology here is that Troy is the very latest stage of the Bronze Age and really a time far before what we normally picture as classical Greece. And then 300 is sort of the peak of the classical era in the sense that there's this conflict between the Greeks and the Persians are invading.
It's the start of the peak of the classical Greece.
Yeah, and then Alexander is almost like the Greek revenge in the sense that the Greeks then invade Persia and go much further all the way into India.
And take over the world.
And I guess in total it spans about 800 years of history or so. So it's actually a pretty long range.
So it starts from like minus 1000 or something like that? Troy?
A little bit earlier. So Troy is sort of associated with the late Bronze Age collapse. And there was a recent book that put that moment in 1177 BCE. But so it's about the 12th century BC.
Right. And then it's like minus 400 and something, right? The 300.
Yep.
And minus 300, the 30, 40, 20, Alexander.
Yep.
So we're not only going to talk about the movies from a historical point of view, about the period they depict. We're also going to talk about when they were made and why they were made the way they were, because that will tell us a lot about that time. And the time all 3 of these movies were made was during the George W. Bush years, after the invasion of Iraq.
Yeah, the movies, they say almost more about our time, or that time, like 10 years ago, a bit more, than about the deep past. I mean, in all 3 of these movies, the enemy is sort of in the east and kind of, depraved and despotic and scary. And of course, the Greeks are very wholesome and free and well-intended. And that whole part about the slavery that they did is kind of...
No slavery. And they're also very white. Very white.
Very white, yes. Yeah.
Yes. So it's not only Iraq, also the tension with Iran, 300, that's very apparent. We'll go into more detail there. I think another overarching theme in those 3 movies is that there's a lot of over-dramatization in everything that they do and they say and they kill and everything. And I think that one could say that this is a faithful adaptation of the Greek drama and tragedy.
Actually also something that was even before that, and that's the hero worship, which was almost part of the Greek religion. And the way that the worship was also expressed in these epic poems
Yes.
Right. So what you see, like the Trojan War, what's in the narrative in Homer and other epics about that time is that there's really these strong, toxic masculine men who do all these heroic things, and then down the line they become sort of demigods, and they are the hero of a particular town or a particular area, and there's like temples to them. And what starts out as history becomes sort of, myth, legend, religion. And so what's very interesting, I thought, is that, for example, Alexander the Great is very conscious and self-conscious of that, right? And so you have to remember that for Alexander the Great, the Trojan War is as long ago as the Middle Ages is for us. Right, so it's almost the way we might think about like the knights from the Middle Ages, and sort of trying to replay that in our time.
Right.
And Alexander the Great was kind of doing that as well. He really wanted to be one of those heroes and follow in their footsteps.
Yeah, so they're all super masculine, hyper masculine, and also hyper gay.
But in a very wholesome way, right? So the Greek gays are sort of buff and kind of, shaved chests and just sweaty and strong. And then the gays in Asia Minor and the Persians are kind of with eyeliner and a bit more freaky. That's not the kind of gay that is really like fashionable right now.
Yeah. And just in 300, they're not openly gay, but it seems like a movie for gay Republicans, if you ask me.
Right, it's very closeted gayness, definitely.
Right.
Yes.
And also they all have British accents. Because this is, of course, what people talked like 2,000 years ago. Of course, more than that. Okay, so let's go to Troy.
Nearly 3,000 years ago, the passion for one woman ignited the greatest battle ever fought, for love.
Troy is the 2004 epic period war film written by the frenemy of the show, David Benioff, directed by one Wolfgang Peterson. If you remember it, Brad Pitt is Achilles, Eric Bana is his nemesis Hector, and Orlando Bloom is his brother Paris. So Troy, that tells the story of the war between most of the Greek city-states and Troy, which is off the west coast of Turkey.
That's a little anachronistic, what you're saying. So in the late Bronze Age, it wasn't really the city-states that we imagine from classical Greece. These were more like palace kingdoms. So most of the economy and most of the power centers were really palaces, more than the classic city with the Acropolis.
Okay.
And then Troy was kind of not really Greek at all, right? So Troy was probably something that would have been called Vilusa or something like that around that time. They didn't speak Greek. They spoke a language called Luwian, probably.
Ooh, okay.
And they had a different writing system with hieroglyphics. And they had a different religion as well. So what the Greek writers and what Homer also did as a general trope is that everyone and all the nations that are visited, everyone can talk to each other and they're all sort of in the same cultural sphere. But that wasn't really the case.
Right. They also make a point, you're right, in the movie.
No son of Troy will ever submit to a foreign ruler. Then every son of Troy shall die.
This movie is based on the epic poem by Homer, the Iliad. So just like the first unimportant thing, Troy, there's the Trojans. So there's, of course, the Trojan horse. And for some reason, when you hear the word Trojan horse, it's not the Trojans who had the horse. But just like Trojan sounds bad, right? It's like an Indian gift. They were given gifts, the Native Americans, but then an Indian gift, it's as if they're giving gifts to take back. There's also a street in a city in Israel whose full name is the Nazi Capturers, but people just call it the Nazis, the Nazi Street. And also Troy, the movie, is basically a gladiator knockoff.
It's swords and sandals. Yeah.
I like that at the beginning when there's this fight scene between Achilles and his cousin, whose name is
Patroclus.
Thank you. And they fight in Greek ruins that were shot in Malta.
Yeah.
So I was surprised that even back then they had Greek ruins. It wasn't new. Yes, they were always ruined. Maybe they built them as ruins.
Greek ruins that are 800 years in the future from their perspective. Yeah, the architecture is all off, right? Because the Bronze Age Greeks, most of the architecture except for Crete was Mycenaean and was a style that was big chunks of rock and not like polished marble and the pillars, and that's all later actually. So it's totally off.
So Achilles in this movie is basically an asshole, straight out of the gate. I think that Brad Pitt did actually a very good job with his fighting skills.
Hector! Of your sword. You won't have eyes tonight. You won't have ears or a tongue. You will wander the underworld blind, deaf, and dumb, and all the dead will know. This is Hector, the fool who thought he
He was able to capture how their values were different. Glory, fate, stuff that we have a hard time identifying with now, going out to war for glory.
Yeah, and also the practice, which is early on in the movie, that when two armies face, perhaps the champions of both armies just fight man on man and maybe resolve the issue that way. And that is quite typical for late Bronze Age warfare. It's in fact basically the same practice as David and Goliath, for example, which is about the same time as well.
Ooh, I didn't know that. So Achilles, he thinks that he's a god, a demigod, maybe better than a god, like he drank his own Kool-Aid. He has black sails, and when they're attacking Troy, he's going in before everybody else in a Saving Private Ryan kind of scene. It just goes into killing and pillaging for his own ego, right? It's like, and I was thinking of this sketch that we talked about a few times, like, Are We the Baddies? This very funny Mitchell and Webb sketch where two Nazi officers talk and maybe come to a realization.
Have you noticed that our caps have actually got little pictures of skulls on them?
I don't.
Hans, are we the baddies?
If you have black sails and you just like want to kill people and priests just because you can and because you wanna make a name for yourself, I don't know how you can be the good guy here.
I liked also that beach scene. I liked how the Trojans had put up these wooden poles, sharpened poles, and it's really supposed to remind you of Saving Private Ryan because those were tank defenses. So I didn't really see the point of those poles, but
right.
I guess the beach has to look sort of crowded with like pointy things.
Right, if you're just like on your own 2 feet, you can go around the pole.
Exactly, you just walk around them.
So on the other side of these poles, there's Hector. And Hector, he represents something. He's the hero and the heir to the Trojan crown. And he represents the polar opposite of Brad Pitt Achilles, right? Yeah. He has some kinds of values from the Enlightenment period, right? He's very logical, almost atheist, humanist, right? He's into human rights. He's populist in some ways, very pragmatic, has mercy. He loves his wife so much that he doesn't want to sleep with other women.
And just like in Munich, he has a baby. He has to go to war and leave his baby behind.
Yes, yeah. He's very faithful, right? Cheating, that's the sin. That's the sin. And also, so if Achilles is for like glory, then Hector is for sad wives, sad widows, right? Also, he has this line that is from 2,000 years later. How many battalions does the sun god command?
Oh, that's Stalin talking about the Pope, isn't it?
Yes. But, maybe Stalin stole it from Hector. And you know what? Like Eric Bana, isn't he like a better-looking version of David Benioff in some ways? No? Oh, okay. So Achilles is a hothead. Hector has a head on his shoulders. Achilles is respected, but Hector is loved. And they even fight in a very contrasting style. Like Achilles, that's beautiful and glorious, memorable. And Hector is very effective, very, very raw. Achilles was born to fight, and Hector only fights because he has to. One is cynical, the other ideological.
He did to us today.
Hector fights for his country. Achilles fights.
Well, the portrayal of Achilles as kind of an asshole and somebody who rages, I don't know if it's historically accurate, but it's definitely accurate in the sense of, the discourse and the poems and so on. Achilles has always been, also by Homer, represented as kind of a hothead and kind of a dangerous guy. And Hector is more sort of seen as like the good guy. And the movie portrays this quite well.
But in some way they're similar. They're both not big believers in the gods. And in their own way, they both respect women. Like Achilles, he doesn't rape, he just kills. That's better, of course. Because raping, that's like killing a puppy in movies. It's worse than killing a human. So rape is worse than murder. But on the other hand, like Achilles, he does hit a woman there, right? To show us what you were saying, that when he goes mad, then he just said, if I hurt you, I didn't want to. I didn't mean to. That's just like...
This hurts me more than it hurts you.
If I hurt you, it's not what I wanted.
From a Me Too era. Or if I hurt anybody, I apologize. That's just straight from the Me Too era.
I thought some of the other characters were kind of interesting as well. Like Ajax is really presented as a brute. And I think they put some words in his mouth that are also completely anachronistic. At some point in a fight, Ajax shouts, "Look upon me and despair." And I'm pretty sure that's from a poem from the 1800s, right? "Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair." But it sounds kind of old-timey, so they had to put that in to make it seem kind of classical.
And you want to say a few sentences about this Ajax fellow that I've never heard about before the movie? Or after or since watching the movie? He's not in the news a lot.
Well, he is a lot in the news if you're Dutch, because that is, of course, the football team of Amsterdam, Ajax. Except it's kind of a not very well chosen hero, because Ajax is kind of brutish, and of course the football of Ajax is very beautiful, and very tactical, very technical, and
very very Jewish. Also, they're very Jewish.
Which Ajax is not really.
So in the movie, Achilles falls in love with the Trojan king's niece. I think that's a little bit of a change from the story.
I guess so. It's generally been suspected that Achilles and Patroclus had an erotic relationship with each other.
And that's why he got so upset that his cousin was killed, because it was his cousin, something of the sort. But he loves, but he can also love a woman. And he's like, if you love someone, set them free. So he just lets her go after some time, and they have an interesting relationship, because she thinks he's a horrible person, because he's not a brute, unlike Ajax. He's a thoughtful assassin and mass murderer. And there's this sex scene when they have sex while she's holding a knife to his throat.
That's hot.
I think that was actually like the only way that she could legally consent to having sex with him. Only if she has a knife on his throat. Any other way, it's basically rape. So they didn't want it to be rape, so just said she could have killed him at any moment, but still, she chose not to. So talk about your Stockholm syndrome right there.
Well, she should have then had actually the knife not on his throat, though, but on his Achilles heel. Shouldn't she?
Ooh. So that's Achilles with women. So Hector, he loves his wife, right? He protects her and everything. But when he makes up his mind that he wants to go, that he needs or wants to go fight Achilles, she has something to say. She objects to it, and he just like silences her, like, shh, Woman!
You don't have to go. You don't.
You remember what I told you.
We're working here. Just do as I say. So he's not 100% progressive.
Well, one thing that I think is a common theme in the three movies, at least, is that the Easterners, so in this case the Trojans, use sex to weaken the wholesome Greeks and plunge them into disaster. And in this case, it's how Paris seduces and abducts Helen from Menelaus the cock.
As he has been known through the ages.
As he has gone down in history.
Yeah.
And similar things actually show up in the other movies as well.
Okay, so we're gonna go back to that.
Yeah, we'll revisit that.
But unlike the other two movies, here the Greek king, he's a mad king. He just wants, like the way he says peace in the movie, peace.
Consorting with the enemy king, giving him 12 days of peace. Peace! Peace!
And he has like those evil Star Wars councils, in contrast to the war councils in Troy, where they are more sympathetic, except the religious dudes who are basically getting shit on by the story. I prayed, something happened, so it means that prayer works, that science, boom, called confirmed.
Yeah, the religion is kind of, in general, mocked in these movies. And I think so the Greeks, the classical Greeks, make such a good tool to play out these East-West things, because it's not too inflammatory, it's not too recent. They're also not like Christian or anything, so that's not like that plays well with an international audience. You can sell it anywhere, but you can still make your points that, you know, if you go east of the Aegean Sea, they're all kind of creeps. and you can be quite secular about it as well, because like if you insult the Greek gods, it doesn't really matter. So most of the characters are not really taking the religion too seriously, and in fact, even people are turned into sort of corrupt priests, but this is more in 300s, when they really aren't even. I guess we'll return to that in a sec.
Yeah. And also another recurring theme regarding female characters is there's this chercher la femme motif in all of the movies. So here, Helen of Troy, Lyanna Stark was abducted. In Alexander, obviously, his mom is behind everything. And also, we've mentioned Lyanna Stark and David Benioff. So here in Troy, Ned kills Jeor Mormont, and Ned doesn't die at the end. He stays alive. Can't believe it. Sean Bean lives.
Odysseus, King of Ithaca.
Unexpected turn of events.
And on the flip side, to the feminine side, as Menelaus shouts, screams like, "This is what you left me for?" Yes, I like him because he's sensitive and sweet. That's good. So he's not as strong as you. I don't care about that.
Paris was kind of a wimp and a coward, according to the stories. So in the original story, she loves him because the goddess Aphrodite made her love him, right? So it's magic, basically. Well, I don't know if the listeners are aware of the side story of the golden apple, right? So once upon a time, there's a golden apple, and it has inscribed on it for the most beautiful one. And three of the goddesses are fighting over it. Athena of wisdom, Hera, the main goddess, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love. And they each offer, and then a shepherd comes walking by who turns out to be Paris, and they make him decide. And then they each offer him something, and Aphrodite offers him, "You're going to get the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen." And so that makes Paris decide to give the golden apple to Aphrodite, and that's how Helen then falls in love with him. So it's not actually his pleasant nature. It's just a magic trick, essentially.
Right. Just like here, I think we should have mentioned it earlier that basically this movie takes all the magical aspects and makes the story realistic. So Achilles is not really immune to any wounds.
So the history of Troy becomes the myth and legend of later times. And even in the movie, they're kind of self-conscious about that. So at some point, Odysseus says,
We sail for Troy in 3 days. This war will never be forgotten, nor will the heroes who fight in it.
Right, sort of expecting already the whole mythology. And of course, Achilles also mainly goes into war in order to become immortal through his heroic deeds.
Right, but he's very mortal, and I think that the best scene in the whole movie was his death scene. He was just hit in the ankle, and then killed by arrows to his body, but he just broke them off. So when he fell and died, just the arrow in his heel was there. So, and that happened just as he was being on Achilles and being tender and kind to this woman that he fell in love with. Okay, so speaking of tender and kind, let's segue to 300.
Threaten my people with slavery and death. This is madness!
Madness.
This is Sparta!
Sparta! Okay, so 300, that's a 2006 American epic fantasy war film directed by Zack Snyder. Right, it's a fictionalized retelling of the famous Battle of Thermopylae within the Greek-Persian Wars. And I find it interesting that this story has survived. It rang to me the first line from a Morrissey song called Maladjusted.
On this glorious occasion of the splendid defeat.
Why has this defeat stayed in history, Rutger? Why has this defeat resonated more in history than many victories?
Well, it was a defeat that actually became the engine or sort of the propaganda for victory later on. Of course, if the Persians had won and they would have just crushed and conquered Greece, we would have never heard of these Spartans again. But then there was a turnaround of events, and the Greeks were able to strike back and eventually get the Persians off their lands. So,
but not in this movie.
Well, at the very end of the movie, you see this massive army of these dense, bare-chested, sweaty, sort of Mediterranean men lining up to beat the Persians. So exciting.
So 2006, that's like the war on terror, tensions with Iran again under George W. Bush. So I don't know, in this post 9/11 world, relishing like a victim mentality and seeing the other as a one-dimensional evil dude. Because at the same time, you had writers everywhere creating bad guys you can empathize with, Soprano, The Wire, The Shield. But in this movie, they're going back to a simpler time when Sparta was Sparta.
Yes, but Sparta is not at all depicted the way Sparta was, right? The propaganda in the movie, they say, the Persians are slavish.
Freedom!
And the Spartans, they represent reason and justice. Sparta was a terrible place. Sparta had its own eugenics program.
No. Really?
Oh, yeah. That you see that a little bit at the start of the movie, that all the deformed children that weren't quite, strong enough, they threw them off a cliff. They had massive slavery. There was a separate class of people, the Helots, who were sort of conquered people, different subjugated peoples, and they were all enslaved. And once a year, it was like the purge for a while, and then Spartans could freely kill Helots. There was massive slavery, and something that has come to bite us in the ass again is the following. So you see the Spartans in the movie, they have their shields, and on them there's this little upward pointing thing, like an inverted letter V, which is actually the Greek letter lambda, right? The capital letter lambda. It stands for Lacedaemon, which was what the Spartans called themselves.
Lacedaemonian?
It's also laconic comes from that, like a laconic statement.
They're very laconic, the Spartans.
Yes. So, for example, when they say, come and get our weapons, that's a typical laconic statement. And what we see now in Europe is there's this movement all over Europe called the identitarians, or the génération identitaire. And they're sort of neo-Nazis, and they use the same logo. So, because now you can't walk around with swastikas anymore, so now they bring back the Persian shield, or the Spartan shield, to show how, of course, the Eastern invaders are going to be defeated in the end.
Right. So they want to protect their freedoms to have slaves and to have guns.
Exactly, because in the movie they also replay the statement where Xerxes says, hand over your weapons, and the Spartans say, come and get them. And that's from a supposedly actual quote. In the Greek it said, molon labe, and that just means come and take. That exact Greek statement is sometimes used in addition to or instead of the NRA statement of, you'll take our guns from our cold dead hands. So that's the kind of freedom that we're talking about here.
Yes.
Very right-wing freedom with slavery and eugenics, annual purges, and massive racism and gun rights.
And basically you don't see any freedom depicted in the movie. But also, so we should talk about the fact that during the Persian-Greek wars, most of the Greek states were not fighting with the Greek states, Greek city-states against the Persians, but even with the Persians. But that doesn't fit the narrative very well of us and them.
Well, and why wouldn't they, by the way? So the Persian Empire was not all that evil.
Yeah.
In fact, the Persians were generally very respectful of local customs. They had no slavery in Persia proper, although maybe in the other nations that were part of the empire it might have been. And they also repatriated people who had previously been exiled, for example.
For example?
Well, so, for example, people who had previously been ethnically cleansed by the Babylonian Empire from Judea, for example.
The Hebrews.
Right. Yeah.
So in the movie, it's 300 Spartans. History obviously says that the numbers were far greater, and they were trying to block the Persians in a narrow path from entering the Greek mainland, fighting against the greatest army that this world has ever seen. And then the Persians beat them and moved on.
I think just briefly as a rejoinder to the how evil the Persians were, supposedly.
Yeah.
So actually there's this sort of roll, kind of a thing out of earthenware that has inscriptions on it. And it is one of the first declarations of sort of human rights, religious freedoms that were recognized by the Persian Empire, and that is now on display at the United Nations in New York.
Oh.
Yeah.
And also, like the Persians, they were perfectly willing to let the Greeks rule themselves with their weird form of government.
Sure.
They call it democracy. Okay. It's not, just like
whatever.
Pay taxes.
No.
Yeah. So I feel that this movie, it seems to me like fascist art.
Definitely. Oh, yeah. This is... Riefenstahl would have been very proud of this. Yeah.
Ah, yes. Like they're the David, the American right-wingers and European right-wingers, they're the David, and the East is the Goliath. So obviously there's no other point in time almost where that was actually the case. So they have to go back to these wars and have the Middle Easterners be the strong power, and they are the underdog, yes. Even while the American Empire with its white men rule the world.
Yeah, but that's also, it's so nice to place it in that past, so you can just say, you can talk about Asia's endless hordes, which they actually mention in 300. Like anytime more into the present, that would be a bit too racist, but if it's that far back, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I think it's also fine if you kick left-wingers into wells in the movie, in Sparta, that works, right? Because the left-wingers are traitors, they're working with the enemy, they don't really want peace, right? Diplomacy doesn't work. You can't negotiate with Arabs, even when they are not Arabs, but Iranians.
Right. That is almost the same, isn't it? There's something that comes back here, which we already saw in Troy, that the Easterners use sex to weaken and seduce the Greeks. So in 300, the hunchback, Ephialtes, is eventually seduced into betraying the Spartans by this whole sort of sex scene where there's these belly dancers and they go all over him and they get him all turned on, and that's basically the bribe. So there's again this sort of depravity from the East, this kind of freaky sexuality as opposed to the very wholesome Greek homoeroticism.
Ooh, very homoerotic. This movie looks like an orgy with all the super slow-mo. Okay, maybe you want to talk a little bit about Leonidas, the Chocolate King, who was basically one of 2 Spartan kings?
Yes, so it's the way the constitutional order in Sparta is not being represented very accurately. There were 2 kings, and in addition to that, there was a council of the ephors who were elected officials. And for example, the ephors were the ones who annually declared when it was time for the purge of the slaves. And in the movie 300, the ephors are shown as these sort of creepy guys on the hill with the oracle. Like early on, there's the freaks who are then being bought by
a black guy.
Exactly. Yeah, but it's not at all accurate, obviously. The ephors were just public officials. And I think they were elected annually or something like that. I don't know exactly what the turnaround rate was, but they weren't priests.
You don't know the turnaround rate of the ephors?
Yeah, I'm sorry. We'll look it up.
What am I paying you for?
Are you paying me?
Shh. Later. You want to move on to Alexander?
Yeah.
I've known many great men in my life, but only one Colossus.
A king isn't born, he's made.
Never will there be an Alexander like you. Alexander the Great.
Let's go for it. So, Oliver Stone's movie from 2004, Alexander the Great, one of the greatest conquerors the world has ever known. All the way from the Greece area to Punjab in the east, Egypt in the south, and in the north into the Stans. Am I right?
So the city of Kandahar, which we all know from the news, is actually Alexandria.
Really?
Yeah. It is one of the many Alexandrias.
I didn't know that it was that. So Alexander, he was crowned at 19.
At the age of 19, he became the Macedonian king. And he swore to free all of nation minor. By the 18th sea, in 334 BC, he utterly beat the armies of Persia.
He was a Macedonian, right? Macedonia, that was like a Greek backwater for a long time, and then he died at the age of 33. Like Jesus. I'm not sure, tell me what you think. I'm not sure if Oliver Stone meant the movie to be that way, but it felt to me to be pro-imperialist. Like the conquerors are good. Okay, they're also kind of barbaric, but they want to unite everybody under one king and one culture and respect local customs. You know, just like having, in the Israeli McDonald's, you have falafel, and the Indian McDonald's, you have curry sauce. So, you know, multicultural, Hellenistic empire.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. I think the main problem, it seems to be, is that there's some kind of imperial overstretch. That was kind of problematic, that they have to go to all these different places, and they get tired from all the conquering. And one thing in that respect, which I thought was really disappointing about this movie, is that there's been this trope, which, for example, we all know very well, coming out of the mouth of Hans Gruber in Die Hard.
When Alexander saw the breadth of his domain, he wept, for there were no more worlds to conquer.
And in the movie Alexander, it comes up like, okay, what will you do when you reach the end of the earth? And then he says something really weird. He says, well, I'll turn around and go conquer the other end, I guess.
Like Colin Farrell, I've never seen him act worse than in this movie. Like he made Alexander, and I blame Oliver Stone for that because we know that Colin Farrell is a good actor. Just made him like every word that he speaks, he's like his whole face is vibrating. He can't talk like a normal person and just like have a normal conversation. He's always antsy and on the edge and on the cusp of whatever, killing somebody or actually killing people. So I guess he was trying to make sense of this real historical character that turned into a mythical figure.
We know a lot more about this history than about any of the other preceding stories. Well, we know quite a lot also about the whole preceding history, and it is a bit not represented very well in Alexander, obviously. So the father of Alexander, Philip of Macedon, he actually laid the entire groundwork for the conquest. He had the army built up, and they
have a few references for that.
A little bit, but also the way the home situation was sort of represented was kind of weird, because in fact, so Philip of Macedon, as the practice was at the time, had multiple wives. And one of the wives is being played by Angelina Jolie with a very weird accent and all the rest, when she was just a Greek, in fact, in the historical record. And Alexander, by virtue of him being her son, was not at all a bastard, even though they kind of suggest that in the movie, like, he's got a chip on his shoulder because he's not really a true son of Philip of Macedon. That's totally not true. He was the rightful heir. So he followed up and actually did the conquest that the family basically was ready to start doing. And by the way, so what is also interesting is that this family of Philip of Macedon also claims the blood of Hercules.
I think I have some Herculean blood in my veins.
Who doesn't?
So basically, he just like, he wants to explore new worlds, to travel, to backpack. But there's no other way to do it during this time, but with an army on your back and to boldly kill Asians that no Greek has killed before. And actually he wants to do some kind of Persian-style colonialism, right? He wants to keep the kings there, as the Persians did. And you can contrast that to the nation building in Iraq that was based on erasing everything, all the institutions, and starting over, including dismissing the army, while they make a point to show that Alexander incorporated the Persian army into his own army. But still he wanted to free Iraq. And you could say that it was a defensive war because maybe the assassination of Philip was just like, Saddam having the WMDs.
Yeah, and in general, of course, once again, the people in Asia Minor are just far inferior to the Greeks. And just like in 300, it's the endless hordes. And in Alexander, they actually talk about how the Oriental races, they actually use that, are known for their barbarity and their slavish devotion to their senses. And again, there's the sexual depravity comes back again. And of course, in full force in Alexander. I mean, he's already a little gay, but then once he is in Asia, then he gets seduced by Bagoas and he starts wearing the eyeliner, and then he really goes off the deep end.
Right. And so the gay sex in the movie is very gentle, but the heterosexual sex is animalistic.
Does she put a knife on his throat as well?
Yes, she does. Yes, she does.
No. That's hot. Here we see sort of how the cycle closes, or how, well, here we see how the Greeks were sort of self-conscious in referencing their own history that became myth. And for example, Alexander references Achilles of Troy.
Yeah, many times.
Right, and there's the whole lecture in the cave, right, where Val Kilmer shows some of the whole mythology, including also Hercules. Right. So the earlier parts become sort of the mythology and the propaganda ideology for the later parts, and sort of motivating further warfare, essentially.
To what you said about the Asian race. And who teaches this Nazi propaganda? That's Aristotle. Is that in his books?
I'm not sure, but I wouldn't put it past him. In general, the Greeks considered, of course, everyone who wasn't Greek literally barbarian. That's where the word barbarian comes from.
I thought it came from the Berbers, in Algeria.
Well, that actually, they were also barbarians. So the way it started out is that the Greeks just called their immediate neighbors who didn't speak Greek. They sort of imitated their language. Oh, these foreigners, they go bar, 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 bar. So they're barbarians. And then that term, barbarian, ended up also in Arabic. And then with the Arabic conquests into North Africa, they started using that word for the Berbers, who of course called themselves something totally different.
They incorporated it? They made it their own?
No. So the Berbers call themselves, like there's a bunch of different nations, and they call themselves in different ways. Kabyle, Amazigh, or they don't call themselves Berber. They consider it derogatory, which it is.
So I want to apologize to all our Berber listeners. Sorry. Not sure how much traction we have in Berberland. Berberistan.
You're making it worse.
Sorry. So
we might have many listeners in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia.
Of course. I'm sorry. It's just yeah. I've never met any. I don't even know any stereotype about Berbers. So yeah, I apologize to the Berber nation.
Good save.
So maybe another motivation that Alexander had, according to the movie, to conquering the whole world and not stopping ever. And I thought that Oliver Stone made, because the movie is so long, you kind of feel that you are on this journey with Alexander, and you're just like, where the hell is he now? Just like, go back home. So it seems that he just doesn't want to see his mom. So all these Indians just have to die because he doesn't want to see his mom. You know, it's like, I'm trying to conquer the world here, Mom. Can you knock before you come into the room? And then she's like, but no one loves you like I love you. Mom! That's it, I'm going to conquer Arabia.
Yeah, but he wasn't rational. I mean, in the Western tradition, let's say, we refer to Alexander as Alexander the Great. But, for example, Persians don't think he's great at all. And the fanaticism of, okay, we're just going to keep conquering and fighting, and I'll die heroically, and I'll go down with the ship if we lose. I mean, he could equally be a Hitler of 2,300 years ago, right?
Yeah, he's horrible. Just like, why do you keep going? Why do you care? Just go back home, relax. So we talked about Philip and Alexander, right? Philip started something, and then Alexander finished it. Not unlike Bush 1, H.W. Bush started something in Iraq, and then Bush 2, I guess, finished it. I don't know. I'm not
made
sure.
It worse.
Yeah, maybe made it worse. But unlike Bush 2, Alexander was quite the general. You want to maybe chime in a little bit on that, on how he was able to conquer this empire? So it was in decline, but still.
Oh, so one thing is that the Macedonians had actually done some innovating in their warfare styles. So they had sort of re-innovated, updated, modernized this phalanx kind of infantry.
The square thing,
strategy. Yeah, the square, 256 men in a square. But they also had pretty good cavalry. So that is kind of maybe not all that Greek if you think of Greek more like to the south, but in Macedonia they had good horses. And so in the movie you also see these cavalry actions here and there. And one thing that I thought was pretty cool, and which they sort of refer to in the movie, but they don't show the actual mosaic, is this one battle where Alexander gets really close to Darius, and is almost ready, or he throws a spear at him but misses, and then Darius takes off in his chariot. And that moment is actually depicted in a very famous mosaic, which they butcher it a little when Oliver Stone shows it, but you can tell that he's referring to it.
So maybe this endless war is the perpetual war against terror, right? We can also see that war causes governments now and back then to infringe on civil liberties, right? Wartime is a bad time to be against the war. And people call Alexander a tyrant, a despot, which was a derogatory term even back then, and the person who does that gets killed. And also 2004, when the movie came out, that was a bad time to be against the war. There was this thing with the Dixie Chicks that got banned because they were against the war in Iraq. But it was interesting the way that they emphasized the Greek value of freedom of speech. Freedom of speech to be racist, not so much freedom of speech to be against the war, but still.
So they were classical liberals, I guess.
Right, so if you're against the war, you are unpatriotic, obviously.
But freedom of speech, of course, should especially be extended for making racist statements. Right?
That's the purpose of freedom of speech.
Yes.
So I was trying to understand this guy, Alexander. So now we don't have world leaders, too many world leaders that are Alexanders. I guess not any, because you don't get to the throne so soon with these opportunities. Sorry?
Kim Jong-un?
Oh, yes, but he's not that good, I guess. But so I was thinking he's more like Jeff Bezos or Zuckerberg, like people who at a young age, there's like a world ripe for conquest, and you never stop, no matter what. Jeff Bezos, no matter how many billions of dollars he has, he will go on, try to underpay his workers, and try to get more money from New York City and all that. This is that kind of non-stop forward mentality.
Yeah, but Alexander, I think, did it also really for the fame and for the heroism and sort of to go down in history. So maybe
Elon Musk,
in politics, we don't really have those kind of people anymore, luckily. But maybe more like pro athletes or rappers or people who just want to be famous for something. And the way to get famous at that time was by military heroism. Alexander kind of gets off on this idea of being as famous as Achilles.
Right. He wants to be the GOAT, the greatest of all time.
Right, exactly.
And maybe just after all this rush of conquest, like backpacking, it's hard to go back to daily life, to just go back to ruling on taxes and on whatever family dispute. Did you feel that this movie was Orientalistic, or maybe as Orientalistic as the other movies that we refer to? Because Alexander is very respectful of this ancient Asian culture, and the movie makes a point to get that message across.
In a way, yeah, but it's also, I mean, it's respectful in a kind of white man's burden kind of way.
Yes, I have it written down here.
And
go ahead.
There's the way that those societies are being displayed is very exotic and kind of decadent. I mean, it would fit very well in sort of 19th century depictions of colonialism and, we're doing something good over there, and isn't this interesting, the East and the mystery, and we're going to bring freedom and...
So I think it's kind of incredible that this guy lived in 320 BCE, and we're still talking about him all this time afterwards. Even though he was great for such a short time, he impacted the world in such a meaningful way. After he died, right, his kingdom quickly fell apart. and all the warring states, Hellenistic states, over time weakened each other and allowed the Romans and Carthage to take over.
Well, yeah, but you can accomplish a lot in like 33 years and people still talk about you like 2,000 years later. So that's not really unique in history.
Yeah, in history.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a lot of very Freudian shit going on there between not only Alexander and his mom. They seem very cozy and chummy, but also obviously with his dad. He loves his dad, he hates his dad, he wants to go further than his dad, again, maybe like Bush W. But he becomes his dad, drunk like his dad, mistreats his wife like his dad. That was, I think, too much on the nose for my taste. So do you want to end maybe with the incredible Iron Maiden song, Alexander the Great? Do you know that song?
No, but I think that's a good end.
It's so funny. It's like a Wikipedia entry. I know, by the way, I know this song almost by heart, still.
We're not just talking about Alexander the Great, he actually still has political relevance. So, for example, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, at least that's what it was called until recently, because they had to not offend the Greeks that much. They picked their flag, and the flag, it looks sort of like a sun or a star kind of shape, which is actually the same shape as is found in the tomb of Philip of Macedon. And so they claim that then the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia and Greece both make is on this legacy, but then the Macedonians have been quite flexible in recent years, because now they decided, okay, well, we'll call our country North Macedonia.
Yes, because in northern Greece you have like an area that is called Macedonia or Southern Macedonia or something of that sort. Yeah, it's incredible how this guy is still relevant and affects world politics, because now they want to get into the EU, so they changed the name because some guy 2,000 years ago conquered these parts. History is weird. And also in every podcast, we're gonna choose each one another bonus movie, and we're gonna discuss that for our patrons. That will be like an extra added content on top of the podcast. And our bonus movies for ancient Greece in movies are mine is 300, The Rise of an Empire, and Rutger, his Hercules. So let's sum it up. So all these movies were made about ancient Greece and ancient Greek-like kingdoms during a time when the West was at war with the East, seemingly unending war, still to this day in some ways. So Rutger, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was great.
And be sure to check our Patreon page on patreon.com/GotAcademy to get extra content. So thank you everybody for listening. And next time we'll do in movies about something else. You can give us your suggestions. We're open to suggestions. We have a lot of ideas, but who knows? Maybe we'll like yours better than ours. So thanks, Rutger.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.